All right, Jonathan. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You've written about and talked about your adoption. I hear that you are undertaking a journey into discovering your heritage and biological family. Can you describe that journey for us?
Yeah, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I don't know, I think like many adoptees, just decided that the time had come where I wanted to learn more about my birth family and just had a lot of questions about identity and ethnicity and wanted to at least avail myself of anything that was possible to pursue answers for that. So I tried about 5 or 6 years ago through my adoption agency and hit a little bit of a dead end and kind of just decided to call it quits. And then just this past year decided to pursue it again after some different circumstances, and I took a DNA test and was able to get matched to a relative. And that happened in December, and since then it's just been a real journey. So the journey is still in progress in many ways of, I think, learning more about my past and learning about myself and learning about this new extended family.
Okay, so you said you hit a dead end with
Yeah.
the agency. How did that make you feel? And because
Yeah.
to me, I would have been like, I don't know. Yeah, you could
Yeah.
just quit and be like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm never going to go back. But something
Yeah.
changed within you. What was it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, I pursued it with the adoption agency, and they tell you at some point, they say, if you hit a dead end, a lot of times that is for one of two reasons. Either one, your biological parents, we can't find them, like there's no address, or another option is they don't want to be contacted. They kind of want to move forward. And I think in my mind, I tried to tell myself that it was, oh, maybe they just couldn't find them. But there's always that gnawing sense, I think, of just a fear of rejection, a fear of not being wanted, where you maybe think, well, maybe they don't want to be found, and maybe they don't want to have that connection or to have that discovery. And so I think I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me at all. But I think the part of it where it does affect you is there's this sense of, am I wanted and am I accepted? And is there somebody that's on the other side of this story who wants to be connected to you? So I think wanting to at least give it a second try was maybe an attempt to say, hey, I don't want to give up that easily.
Yeah. Okay, I do want to go to the part right now where you currently are at.
Yeah.
But before we get there, theologically, what's
Yeah.
running through your mind? Because you're not, I mean, you're a pastor, right?
Yeah.
So, and you're a counselor, so you have all this theological knowledge about God being your
Yes.
Father. But how does
Yes.
that play, and how does that interact with as you're searching
Right.
for your biological?
Yeah, I think theologically and as a pastor, I think especially in earlier adoption stories, there's such a push to really theologize adoption in a good way. So, God's sovereign, this was his plan for your life. He picked this family out for you. You're so lucky, you got saved from this horrible life. And I think a huge burden sometimes that gets placed on adoptees is this theology of gratitude and gratefulness, where you should be really thankful. But it doesn't also get accompanied with a theology of loss and trauma. Of this adoption also represents a significant trauma and loss, not only for the birth parents, but also for the adoptee. And so I think, pretty much all through like growing up and through like my adolescence and even into early college, I think tried to repeat that narrative to myself of, listen, this probably was God's best for my life. I should just feel really thankful. So anytime I did have feelings of, I think, wanting to connect with either my ethnicity, my culture, I don't know, I think I just tried to honestly kind of squash it down and minimize it. And I think over time I've just realized I think both of those things can be held in tension. I think I can still be grateful for how the Lord's worked in my life, but still have a longing and a desire to learn more about my birth family and my adoption.
Yeah. And right now, you said you're currently on the journey.
Yeah.
And yeah, how do you feel right now, knowing that you have met some?
Yes. It's been, I tell people it's been one of the sweetest, most surreal, most unforgettable experiences of my life. I think that when I took the DNA test, I never in a million years would have imagined that this would have been the outcome. And just in God's providence, I think, in being connected and finding a family, I think it just taps into this very human reality and experience where we all want to be accepted. We all want to be a part of a family. And I think in many ways, that whole or that piece that a lot of adoptees talk about in terms of, hey, this is a piece that's just missing. I don't think it's all the way there, but I just feel like the Lord's really helping me make progress in that.
Yeah, and I thank you for writing the article that you did for Solar, where you did share some of your journey. On the article, you talked about, what was it? You talked about the adoption dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you kind of rephrase that?
Yeah.
Yeah, just so people who are watching the video version
right.
can get an understanding.
Yeah. Again, I think I think a part of the big dilemma is this idea where we're supposed to be really thankful for our adoption, be thankful for our adopted parents. This heavy theology of adoption, which I think is rightfully preached and proclaimed, especially within Reformed circles, but still this, I would say, very human reality of, there's always a lot of questions about your ethnicity and about who you are in this culture. And so I think part of the dilemma then is spiritual. I think there's a huge social dilemma too. I think part of the social dilemma is just you're never really white and fully accepted within those spaces, and you're never fully accepted, or at least feel accepted within your own ethnicity or family of origin. And so it creates, I would say, in some ways, for most of my life I've been in majority white spaces and worked in a majority white church. It's this odd dynamic where inherently that you are different, but those differences, I think, not purposefully, but sometimes just subtly and overtly and unintentionally just kind of get whitewashed over. So, and it sometimes can be really difficult to talk about and to acknowledge then within some of those spaces, some of those dilemmas that you face.
Yeah. So everybody can go and read your article where you address that directly. But let's move on to this other question. As a biblical counselor, how would you advise adoptees or parents of adoptees who are struggling to live in the present while wanting to discover their past? Is the latter necessary?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think that, when I'm talking to other fellow adoptees or talking to families that are even considering adoption, I think one of the things that just over the past 5-10 years is there's just been a lot more writing and a lot more resources on it than there were, say, 20-25 years ago. I would say one of the biggest things I tell families is just to acknowledge adoption as loss, that there's always a loss and a trauma associated with adoption. And Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a really well-known book that a lot of people have read now called The Body Keeps Score, he talks about trauma, and he says all trauma is pre-verbal, meaning that a lot of the trauma that a lot of people face, they're experiences that are even hard for us to put words to. It's not like we can fully articulate, this is what trauma is and this is what abuse is. And I would say I personally have felt that. I don't want to say that that's how every adoptee feels, but I remember reading that and just really resonating with it, that there are these very deep longings and very deep sorrows and sadnesses associated with adoption that I think, again, early on, I was kind of forced unintentionally to kind of suppress and quell underneath this, I think, understandable move to be grateful for the situation that you find yourself in. So, I would really encourage families, be willing to talk about that as early as possible, be willing to talk about the loss that's there, and then to provide space for adoptees to handle that grief and loss in a variety of different ways, right? Not to hurry that process up, not to truncate that process, not to offer, trite platitudes about God's sovereignty, but to just sit with people in the midst of that.
Oh, I appreciate that. So you can edit this part out, but my first son is adopted. So his name is Linus, transracial adoption.
Yeah.
That piece where you said, remember it's a traumatic experience. And this trauma, I'm assuming he's going to be carrying with him.
Yes.
Maybe not as extreme throughout his life. But it's always going to be there.
Yeah.
And you're telling me, don't ever dismiss that.
Right. Don't dismiss it. And again, I don't want to presume to speak for all adoptees, because I know a lot of adoptees have different feelings about it. But just the fundamental things that we know about attachment, how important those early attachments are in childhood development, and just knowing, a child's ripped away in many ways, in a very horrible circumstance, from their mother and from their father, and just understanding that those losses are real, and understanding that, then that raises a whole host of questions of, was something wrong with me? On my birth certificate from Korea, there are two boxes that are checked. There's one box that says legitimate, and there's another one that says illegitimate. And on my birth record, it's illegitimate. And again, it's just a word, but you begin to realize words help shape your identity, and you grow up for 39 years, and the word that comes to mind is you are illegitimate. You're not legitimate. And just understanding some of those dynamics, I think as adopted parents especially, I think adoption can be a really beautiful thing. But I think you can also attend to some of those early complexities and dynamics in a really meaningful and loving way.
Oh, that's good. And yeah, that's definitely our mindset. Like, how can we serve him right now at his age, right? To help him as he grows older.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of families that adopted at our church.
Okay.
How does your church maybe, I saw on your website, it says adoption, like that's a specific ministry that you have.
Yes.
How would you want to encourage churches maybe to look into this, or to pursue or to have this type of ministry? Yeah.
Right. I would say, at Parkside, we have a group, I think it's called Embracing Families, and it's really, I think, geared towards helping families at kind of the front end, trying to help them navigate decisions about adoption, whether or not that's a good fit for them. I think it probably tends more towards domestic foster care and adoption, but I would just encourage churches to make spaces for adopted families to even raise those topics of conversation, to be able, if you don't have the resources, to point them in the direction of other resources. And a lot of times there aren't even ones that you know about, so it's a matter of like kind of tracking down people who can track down other people, but just being willing to support families in that particular way. And especially for adoptees who are international, just realizing that for a lot of them, if they're growing up in more majority white spaces, that's going to bring some significant challenges that I think a lot of times those seeds are sown probably more in childhood and adolescence. But then when you get to be a little bit older, a lot of adoptees kind of have that fundamental turning point in their late 20s or 30s of, who am I? And, what is my background? And they really start to ask some of those important questions.
Okay, I want you to imagine that you're speaking to somebody that's considering adoption.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe they're sort of open to it, thinking about it. Would you encourage this? How would you encourage them to do this?
Yes.
Like, speak directly to the person that's watching this, like,
right.
Jonathan, do I do this or not?
Yes,
You can talk about financial concerns, you can talk about all that stuff. Yeah.
I would say, at the front end, obviously, make the decision with good counsel, seek other people out. Don't pursue adoption to fill a hole. Like, a lot of times the way that adoption can get framed is, again, it puts you into a position of superiority, and it puts the adoptee in a position of inferiority to where you are doing them a favor. And so I would just want, if that was a part of the thinking, again, that wouldn't be bad as much as it is just kind of our cultural water that we drink in, just really asking the Lord to change that theology of, it's not of, hey, I'm doing you a favor and bringing you on, but hey, this is something that I really feel like the Lord has laid on our heart and that we believe is a good fit for our family and for the kingdom. And then also I would just say, be really willing to bear with the ups and downs of just the trials and the ups and downs of adoption, and just realize that I think culturally in the media it gets portrayed as this wonderful storyline. People are going over to China, getting babies, bringing them back, and living happily ever after. But a lot of times those children have struggles, and just knowing, hey, be there for your child during the valleys as well as those mountaintop experiences, and realize that, like with any child, there's going to be challenges and joys and privileges and responsibilities. But people ask me, are you still pro-adoption? I'd say, absolutely. I believe in adoption. I think it can be a beautiful thing. I think it can be not a good thing for certain people, but I do think that it can be a wonderful option for many others.
I love that piece where you said, it's going to be ups and downs.
Yes.
Sure. It's not exactly, you're reading the fairy tale.
Yes.
Fairy tale book. I love that.
Yeah.
You said that if it's part, adoption can be a part of God's kingdom plans or whatever. Let's talk about that. Let's say, how do you see this fitting into the storyline of Scripture and playing it out in reality and in real life? Yeah, where does this fit into God's purposes and plans? Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's, probably 10 years ago, I would have answered that question a lot differently. It has just been, in God's sovereign will, like there's need and there's opportunity over here, and those two things kind of come together. And I would say now, like I don't know, I am trying to think through that question a little bit differently. And
If anything, maybe the way I come at it from now is just there is an opportunity for an expression of self-sacrificial love. That one of the beautiful things I think for adoption is it is an opportunity to display self-sacrificial love for another person, where I maybe self-sacrifice certain comforts for myself or certain things that I want. I remember a friend of mine who was adopting transracially. They were a white family adopting a black child. And they started to get advice from different people about that. And they were challenged. They said, would you be willing to move to a predominantly black neighborhood to raise your black child? And that family really wrestled with it, but then they decided to do that because maybe their own personal preferences might be able to grow up in a white suburban, area of a metropolitan area, but they realized that for their adopted child, self-sacrificial love and moving towards him might mean helping him grow up in a context where he is going to see people like himself. And so for them, that was a movement that they could make. And so again, I say all that not prescriptively like this is how you must do it, but it's a possibility that at least I think that you can consider.
It's I feel like you have a lot of perspective on this issue, and I think it's good that we can record this and get it out there.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're nearing the end.
Okay.
Let's do maybe one more. And this is going to be the talking directly to somebody who's adopted.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can talk about the dilemma. You can talk about from your experience.
Yeah.
Any words of encouragement, whether maybe they do know their biological parents, maybe they don't. Yeah. Just how can you encourage?
Right. If I was speaking to adopted kids and speaking to adoptees, I would say take time and take space to really be open and honest about the things that you're thinking and feeling. Don't suppress those things. I find that when we suppress those things, we typically get emotionally dysregulated and it leads to a lot of other issues. But when we can be open and honest about some of these feelings of why was I given up? Where's my mom? Why don't I look like everybody else? What happens if I don't love or get along with my adopted parents? All of those questions, I think what the Bible shows us is that the Bible is never dismissive of any of our concerns, never minimizes pain or loss or suffering, but probably in quite the opposite way, Scripture invites us to come to the Lord with those questions. Whether or not we get answers to those questions, that's not always guaranteed, but the invitation to be honest and the invitation to be open about loss, that was something I wish would have happened for me a lot earlier on in my own process. Instead of suppressing, instead of just trying to kind of put a happy face on everything, to be able to have some spaces with other people, with family members, to just say, hey, this is hard, or I don't understand this, or this is confusing for me. So if you are adopted, I would just encourage you, maybe if right now you don't have anyone in your life to do that with, maybe just start journaling, maybe just start asking the Lord for help to be honest and to be vulnerable about some of those spaces within your heart.
Jonathan, thanks for sharing your testimony, and thanks for pointing us to the greatest story of all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.